Guy Weigert, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Let's start with the basics. Who are you? What do you do? And why do you do it?
So I essentially run the sales solution business unit. So I'm essentially a general manager managing one of four business units in Similarweb. No, so the company itself, it does market intelligence. Essentially, we collect data on lots of websites worldwide, more than 80 million websites, and we aggregate this information to resell it to companies that might be interested in that. The classic use cases would be marketing companies that do B2C, retailers, travel companies. My business unit specifically is reselling this information to B2B organizations. So we would come to companies like AdTech, logistics, payment companies, and would allow them to allow their salespeople to find new websites and convert them into revenues.
So I understand where is the data coming from. It's coming from websites and what's happening on the website. But why is data coming from website activity so important in business contexts?
So I think that generally speaking, when we look at if you're a salesperson that's selling to, let's say, a retailer, like a bunch of retailers here in the UK, in today's world, most of the online shopping is most of the shopping is moving into online shopping. It's growing in a pace of about 35% year over year, online shopping versus flat or a slight decrease in offline shopping. And so most retailers today would invest heavily on their websites because they want to convert as many shoppers as possible. And so most retailers would care about their own online presence. When we're talking about mid-sized retailers, they normally don't tend to sell on marketplace that much, so that they're not relying on the eBay, Amazon networks of the world. They rely on their own direct website. It's also more profitable for them. And so with that trends of a lot of retailers caring about their own online performance, that brings this attention on their website, which helps our customers be a bit smarter and more knowledgeable about how their prospects are behaving. I'll probably go back a bit to how I got to Similarweb. So I used to be a customer of Similarweb back when I was at Criteo. It's an ad tech company, and so I used Similarweb for that exact same use cases. And I kept in touch with the CEO of the company for a couple of years. We always talked about collaborating together, but never found the exact role. And when I heard that Similarweb is considering splitting its business into different business units, I immediately kind of got in touch. And that's mostly because I'm truly passionate about helping salespeople, sales ops. I've grown in this business and in this function, and so I'm very happy I feel very fortunate to help salespeople, and so I'm truly just passionate about the product, and that's a big part of why I'm doing this.
It comes across, at least in your LinkedIn communications. I think this is what put you on my radar as a guest for the show. The genuine passion that comes across.
Yeah.
The ability to get insights out of data. So for those who are interested in that space, I'd highly recommend connecting and following. My first interaction with Similarweb, I think it was 2010. Was the company already in existence, or am I making this up? 2011 maybe?
Yeah, it was already existing. Yeah.
I had a blog called Balls, as in testicles in Hebrew, and I wanted to pitch the blog for a few potential sponsors, and I used data from Similarweb, the free part of it, to say, hey, here's how much traffic my website is seeing. It's before I knew how to use Google Analytics, and it landed me my first sponsorship deal.
There you go.
So I think I'm indebted to the company for about £15,000. No, but seriously, it was super helpful to make meaning out of what I was doing digitally, and I know you've scaled that product tremendously since. How much money did the company raise so far?
Slightly more than 120 million over, I think, 4 or 5 funding rounds. Yeah.
What's the approach to growth in the business?
We're actually growing quite fast. So the company, from a journey perspective, the company started monetizing its product in 2013, right? So we operated in, not a stealth mode, but we operated in non-profit for the first few years. We haven't had the funding round, I think, for the last 2 years now, or a bit more than that. But that's just because we're managing to grow quite fast with the funds that we have. So we're doing well from the way that we we grow responsibly. Let's say, and still quite fast with double digits. So
You say grow responsibly as opposed to what?
as opposed to spending $10 million per year on PPC and marketing spend, that is probably not going to get you that return. Going to get you some additional audience and additional accounts, but not as much as you need to actually have a sustainable business.
The dependency on bot traffic and bot leads creates a kind of, I think, sometimes prevents companies from actually reaching product market fit, because you force your leads into some sort of a funnel and you kind of impose the sell on them rather than having a great product that grows organically. But it's also a pretty brave choice in today's economy, where growth capital is a strategy, injecting money into companies to wear out the competition. Now you're a company that's growing rapidly, expanding rapidly. How many people were there when you joined?
When I joined, we were about 400 people.
Okay, so it's no longer a startup that doesn't know what it's doing. Like, there's processes, there's roles, there are hierarchies.
I'd say that it's a good question. I think that yes, definitely not. It's not like a 50 employees startup, 100%. Similarweb is an environment, I guess, when one of the reasons why we're able to grow so fast without like a huge amount of capital is because we are constantly evolving. So while it was a 400 employees company, it was still changing roles and responsibilities quite often, changing teams, to try to adapt to the market as quickly as possible.
Constantly evolving sounds to me like something that on a job description would say fast-paced, dynamic environment. Can you translate it for us, as in, what does it actually mean? If I'm an employee, I'm one of the people who are working in the sales solution part of the business. What does it mean to me that this is a fast-moving company?
On the day-to-day, it would mean that first you might come in every week, and there will be different priorities, right? So you might not be able to plan 4 months in advance. I want to work on project ABC. So that's kind of the day-to-day, I guess, or the immediate means. It will mean that timelines are normally reduced by 95% of what you expect that you have, which means that if someone is asking you for a quick analysis, it's not going to be, oh, give me 3-4 weeks to do that. It will probably be by Tuesday or by Monday, or sorry, by Wednesday. So it has a lot of implication on the way that you just work and operate as an individual contributor. I think that on the flip side, it has a lot of excitement. So there are a lot of just new things. You learn a lot. There are new elements that are coming into the business every day. You might be starting the week thinking about your inbound marketing activities for this week, and then end up with working with the SDRs on outbound.
SDRs, sales development representatives. So that's what a fast-moving company means: short timelines, shifting priorities. Who thrives in those type of environments, and who do you see that struggles?
It's a good question. I think that it's probably, I don't want to overgeneralize it, because I'd say that I personally also struggled in this environment 5 years ago and evolved into thriving in this environment. So I originally came from my first 8 years of professional experience were in very large companies, multi kind of like $1 billion companies.
Like what?
Like I used to work in Zim, which is a shipping company that is 5,000 employees, global company. Then I joined Criteo, was at the time 2,000 employees.
What does Criteo do?
Criteo does ad retargeting, so they are in the advertising technology space. They serve ads for consumers, essentially, in a very complex fashion. And a great company, but still was no startup by any means. And so adapting to the next couple of experiences that I had was difficult, right? What I've just mentioned about timelines and deadlines, that was a personal pain for me coming from big companies into startups. So I think that the first thing I could say is that people who thrive in this environment are people that are flexible, that adapt quickly, regardless of your baseline. If you're allowing yourself to adapt quickly, you'll probably be in a good shape. People that enjoy different, like the variety of topics, that enjoy the unpredictable, right? That enjoy change, that are creative, that in a way that allow themselves to explore new avenues within the company, speak to new people, constantly evolving within the company. Those people, I think, would thrive well.
If I'm debating, I'm hearing all this talk about startups and dynamic environments and fast moving, and it sounds super exciting. How can I ask myself these questions? Am I compatible? Will I have fun? Will I thrive in that environment? Can I even ask those questions beforehand, or should I just give it a go?
I'd say give it a go is always a good, especially if we're talking about if you're early on in your career, you're kind of like in your first, let's say, 5 to 10 years of your professional experience. Give it a go, and I don't think there's nothing bad that could come out of it. Worst case, you're gonna spend a couple of years and realize that it's just not for you, and that was a great learning experience for you. So I think that early in the career, I just advise going for that. I think that there are some cues to do for that. For example, so if you're in an interview process with a startup, and you're kind of in a presentation stage, and you will probably have little context on the presentation. You'll need to have a very fast turnaround of 48 hours or so. And so that's already an indication. Are you able to do that? Are you in kind of like just preparing to an interview from one day to the next? So I think that's already an indication of how the work would be in the startup. And other than that, just talk to people in similar situations.
So, a good hiring process for a startup in the junior roles will also include some of what the work itself will entail. So
Yeah.
even though you do it asynchronously, meaning you get a task, but you have a certain amount of time to complete it, it simulates what the working environment would look like. Moving from a company like Zim, 5,000 people, to a company with 800 people, what changes in how you work?
I'd say that the first change is that you have less processes. So there's just more uncertainties. You're coming into a place that things are not as established. You probably need to create more things from scratch. In that experience, for example, I built a function from scratch. We built the sales operations. It was me and another 4 guys worldwide, building in each region the sales operations function. So you're coming in and there is just nothing there. You just need to figure it out.
And that's at 800 people.
Yeah.
So even 800 people, what sounds like an established business, still has some black holes in it, things that don't exist. It's not just process improvement, it's also process creation.
For sure. I think that that's very common, less so these days, but 6, 7 years ago, I'd say that sales ops was just a new function. Generally speaking, like if you look 20 years back, sales ops just didn't exist as a function. And so a lot of companies have adopted this function quite late in their cycle. It's very common to have the first sales ops person at about 100 employees. For Criteo, they were late adopter. They started that with 600, 700 employees, and I was just hired briefly after that.
Let's double click on the sales operations role because though in the startup scene it's already a well-known term, well-defined, in the general population, I don't know if it's quite there yet. So what is the sales operation function?
Good question. I think that first we need to remember that it's still actually very different from company to company. I'd say that the fundamentals of sales operation, though, is essentially a sales operation team would be measured on improving the sales performance of the company. that normally involves several responsibilities. The most common that probably all companies share is managing sales process through the CRM. So whether you have in Salesforce as your CRM or Microsoft Dynamics or any other CRM platform, and CRM is customer relationship management platform, you essentially you would admin that platform and make sure that salespeople record all the information in that and are moving opportunities and pipeline through that. From that responsibility, some companies take it into compensation plan for salespeople and building a compliance structure that allows them to put the company forward, given that those incentives, and that actually has a lot of impact on the sales team, how you structure your compensation plan. There is an element of sales enablement that some sales operations teams are doing, so sales training and development of salespeople. There's an element normally of forecasting and budgeting and being responsible for the business operations, if you like. And lastly, there is most sales operations team would also be responsible for other sales tools, things like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, if you're using Gong for conversational intelligence, outreach of sales lot for email outbound platforms and so forth.
This is where it gets super technical. So let's recap, because sales operations, I think it's a super exciting option for people who are interested in business but don't want to do sales. Per se. I don't want to be the person on the phone, but I do love driving commercial success for business. So sales operation, it's a function within the sales role. It's a function that has responsibilities not on the sales call themselves, but on the environment in which sales get done. So you broke it down into performance, being able to track and measure how sales are done, what are our conversion rates, success rates, who are our best customer versus our most challenging customers, opportunities. Enablement, meaning spotting these trends and being able to help our teams get better at selling. Then compensation. How do we incentivize our salespeople the right way so they are super motivated to sell and keep selling and they do well? And also, how do we keep the margins for the company? How do we make sure that we stay on track to meet our business goals? Forecasting, which is super tricky. I'd love us to talk about it later, but forecasting, being able to basically tell a story of what's going to happen or illustrate scenarios. If we do A, this is what we can expect. If we do A plus B, this is what we can expect. Super critical for companies who are navigating a lot of uncertainty and have to communicate to board members, to the marketplace. And then lastly, the tools, the IT stack. What tools are we using? What tools communicate with one another? And so on and so forth. Super robust.
Yeah.
So when coming from a 5K people company to an 800, you had to build that. That means also handling a lot of existing processes, a lot of existing tools that were already in place, right?
Yeah, I think that for at the time for Criteo, we were just in the process of buying a couple of additional tools. So we were the tools element was not that huge, just because we were kickstarting it essentially. But processes and obviously the company had salespeople and had compensation plans for these salespeople. So that meant essentially us getting into that process and improving that. So it was a combination of building new things and improving existing. I'd say that at the time for us, the majority was mostly improving comp plan and forecasting. It was more building things like sales or robust sales process that wasn't there, and building on tools and the stack that the team was using.
So we picked up on two challenges. One is how you navigate a more nimble workplace with fewer processes, and then doing the legacy work of coming in. It's not, you didn't get to build that company. You join in the middle and you have to both improve what's going to happen in the future and also optimize what is already happening. And then let's talk about the cultural differences. Cultural differences, I think, is huge. About 40% of the London tech scene comprises of expats, people who came in to do work. So that's a huge percentage, but it's still not the majority. And even if it was the majority, that majority is comprised of people of different nationalities, different cultures, different ethnicities. Let's start with the individual level. So when you first moved to the UK, after working in Israel or from Israel, what were the main challenges you faced, culturally speaking?
I'd say that in the first job, I almost got myself fired after 6 months, right? That's just probably the biggest outcome of that challenge. For me, moving in from Israel, which is a very direct environment, I'd say very intense, sometimes tends to be aggressive environment because of the level of directness. I came and just expected a lot of my colleagues, the people I report to or work with, senior stakeholders in the sales organization to be just acting similarly. And no matter how much theoretical preparation I had during my MBA and reading on the cultural differences, it's just, I guess, when you face it on your day to day, it's different. Your kind of nature is to just maintain the same behavior from the past.
How did you almost get fired? What happened there?
I had two managing directors that I need to support as part of the sales ops organization. Both of them were running different business units. And the person that I worked with the most, I guess we just didn't see eye to eye a lot of professional elements. He didn't really embrace the sales ops function. I didn't really make his life easy embracing it as well.
In what way?
I came in and had like a lot of recommendations. I came in from this subject expert matter place and basically recommending some changes, how we need to operate going forward. I guess he saw it as he saw it as someone coming from the outside, not from his team, all of a sudden making recommendations and changing things that probably didn't need as many changes. So I guess it was a combination of me being overly aggressive in what I proposed. That could be like changes to compensation plan. We ran some sort of an incentive program as well, like an additional competition plan at the time, and some sales process changes. He saw it as just a threat, I think. A threat or not, a threat is probably not the right word. He saw it as a change. It probably wasn't as much needed because business was going well, which they were.
So business was going well, and all of a sudden comes this guy speaking with a funny accent, starting to make all these recommendations. Now, you could be right about these recommendations. You know, you were hired in a professional capacity, but sometimes it's not about what we say; it's about how we say it. And when you make a recommendation, that's true not just for a guy; it's true for everyone. It means someone is doing something wrong, or something can be done better. So it's very easy to interpret that as a criticism or passing judgment on a person's role. If you come in and you have to pitch changes to someone who's more senior than you, and everything is going well, the motivation to change, sometimes it's not there.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't there. I mean, I look in hindsight, there are so many things that I could have done better. But I think it's a lot of, like you were asking about cultural changes. I mean, things that I still remember. We had a very intense meeting one time, and at the end of it, he was proposing something. I said, you know what, I just don't agree. And like from a cultural perspective, I remember his look, and he looked at me as if like, how dare you saying that you don't agree with me? Which for me was just like, a casual statement.
This is how we speak, right?
Yeah.
Israelis would often start sentences by no but.
Yeah.
We'll start with the no and say a but, and then we'll give our version of it. So going back into that room, into that situation, what would you do differently to the Israeli super direct approach?
First, I would, in that moment, I would probably use a better phrasing. So I would probably soften the statement, saying something along the lines, if I understand you correctly, this is what you're saying. Why don't we explore several options and see which one is the best, as an example, which is, I guess, a subtle way to say there are other alternatives. So I would probably use a different wording, but I would say that on a bigger picture, if I was there 7 years ago, I would focus a lot more on building the relationship, focus a lot more on serving his needs rather than my needs. At the time.
That's huge, and it comes across as a key learning for so many people that has been on the show, because you go in, you are hired at a professional capacity, you are super motivated to see changes, as an outsider, you can see what is done wrong, and you can change it. So like, why not just roll up your sleeves and do it, right? People, when they have to pitch their first 100 days or the first month, you go all in. But you're saying it's not necessarily the best way to go. Maybe there's a more indirect way of doing that. Maybe by pacing yourself a little bit, you are more likely to get the outcome you would have wanted. What does it mean building relationship when we're talking about cross cultural differences? How would you go about that? What advice would you give folks who are new to the workforce or new to a company, and they have to kind of establish themselves within the business before they start suggesting changes?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the first thing, I mean, there's obviously the element of this like extracurricular stuff, like go with people for drinks and just try to build a trust and bond. But I'd say from a professional perspective, I think it's very, I guess the key learning and the key advice that I would give people is try to understand what they need from you. Try to be of a help to them, right? Because at the end of the day, you're here to make things better, but you need their support. So whether you're in a sales ops function, a finance function, any other support function that supports the go-to-market, the sales organization, you want to help them improve, right? And for that, you need to hear from them. You need to hear from them.
So the first line in a person's mission statement would not be, do this, do that, change this, change that, is to figure out how can they help their higher ups.
Yeah, 100%.
I've never seen that in a job description, I've never seen a job description that says your number one priority is to help your managers do their job right. But in so many conversations we had, this is exactly it. First of all, see how you can be a contributor to the larger organization. Only then find ways to individually express your professionalism. That's a big difference.
We did a sales calls with him and another few people from my team, and we strategized for Q1 which companies we want to go after and what's the approach. At some point, one of the team members said, I really think we should listen to John, who is the salesperson, because he just brings the most experience. And I was, you know what, you're right. Yeah, he has the most experience. That's his role. He's going to be the one delivering the revenue. Let's just let the man decide. And I think that's just like, sometimes you just need to, even though that you're internally think, oh, what I'm doing is right, you just need to let other people bring their own experience.
You said that startups sometimes camouflage their like poor execution or poor planning with the reframing of, it's a learning experience.
Yeah.
What did you mean?
I feel very strongly about it, as you can see. I think that in many changes that are happening in startups, whether it's shift of the business, you're just executing a new process, and you're forecasting process, you're launching a new team, launching a new product, moving, changing of pricing. Startups tends to, I guess, especially people growing startups, don't tend to see the bigger picture. So they wouldn't do a full mapping of all the implications. And what happens is very commonly you're driving some sort of a change or a process, and you're not thinking of all the implications. You do that, the next day something breaks. And if it's something breaks, technically fine, you fix it. If it's a bug or things like that, but if something breaks from a process perspective that you haven't, or from people are leaving, that obviously has a larger implication. I think that, to me, it's not rocket science. As in, like, take a few more days to think about it, bring in more people to consult with, have like more opinions, mean also that you're mapping more implications that might happen, and then you're just more prepared.
So you're saying the move fast and break things approach to work had failed you?
I wouldn't say it failed me, but I think that it has its place, but not always. It has its place, but not always. I think that when you're doing like really tiny changes, when I need to post a new blog post or run a new marketing campaign, well, let's just do it and see how it works, because we can debate about it for 2 months, but it wouldn't move the needle. But when I'm doing like a huge change in the company that potentially will break a lot of things, you probably want to take a couple of more days to think about it. And I think it's less about the time, it's more about involving a larger audience to allow more opinions. Not so much, you don't have to, you can ignore those opinions afterwards, but it's just to ensure that there is enough people to reflect what the implication of that decision.
I think that's such a simple thing to do, but it does take time. It does at least appear to slow you down. And sometimes when you're operating with a lot of autonomy and you don't have to do that, as in you can just deploy, it's easy to not do.
Yeah.
VP of the sales solution, how many people do you manage?
About 6-7 of them at the moment.
6-7 of them. And what functions?
So my core team is product marketing, strategy, and marketing.
So these are all roles whose output affects the entire company. It's not individual contributor whose sales quota, it could be 95% on target or 120.
Correct. Yeah.
So these are working on projects that are deployed internationally.
Correct.
How many customers roughly is their work influenced by?
Hundreds.
Yeah. And if you attach it to a revenue number, so the work your team does, how much in potential income is out there for them?
We're about 15% of the company's revenue, and we're talking about millions.
Okay. Yeah. So this team of 7 people or so is in charge of $1 million in revenue through the work they're doing on projects that affect the company all over the world. Were you ever surprised by work that was done under you in your name and you were like, ooh, I did not see that coming?
Yeah, I'd say I want to consider myself as like, because I'm very aware of these things, I want to say that normally I try to involve as many people as possible, but for sure, I mean, I think that I'll give you an example. 3 months ago, we've done a pricing change for our product line, which I considered as, it's an organic responsibility of my team. I have a few dotted line salespeople and account managers that is reporting to kind of my business unit, and so we'll just enable them. We'll do this price change easy, and it got massive pushback from the C-level, right? Massive pushback. To the level that we've been debating it for like 6 months now. I think that was probably the most recent one. And hindsight, for sure, I would have consulted with a lot more people. Even though I consider myself as someone that is aware of that, that's a classic example of just another 1 or 2 hours conversation with 4 people would have prevented this.
The worst meeting I've ever had was just that, the worst meeting. I work on a project, I want to pull something from my back pocket at the very last minute to save the day. I've done all the groundwork I could, and I invite all the senior stakeholders into the room, and I want to wow them. And one thing I learned is that senior stakeholders don't like to be surprised or wowed. They like to know what are they walking into. So that's another point about what helps the people above us in the organization.
Absolutely. The C-levels, and generally speaking of senior people, like transparency, like predictability, 100%.
It's key because in startups world, you find yourself doing an individual contributor and then climb to a VP position, sometimes very quickly, within the space of weeks, even in the same company.
Yeah.
One of the upsides of fast-moving companies is plenty of opportunities. The downside is zero preparation. Bam, you're landing in the VP seat, and now you have to figure out not how to work with your peers who are same level as you, but how to work with people who are 5 to 10 years older and more experienced and have pressures that you're not even aware of. So in that regard, I want to ask you about your role in your direct's life. So the people you are directly manage, how do you see your role in their life? How much attention do you give to coaching, considering that the tenure of startup employees is getting shorter and shorter?
I'm a big fan of coaching, and generally speaking, I think in my role specifically and in my team, what keeps them in the company is a feeling of something big. So these are not salespeople that get commission or money driven quite easy. Now, I wouldn't say easy is probably not the right word, but it's quite straightforward.
Your outcome is directly impacted by the work you do, how much time you give it and how well you do it, versus product changes that has a lot of uncertainties and ambiguities and opinions.
Exactly. In my team specific, I think that I'd say probably three things. There's some sort of a vision and sense of something big, right? Like almost like an identity. One of the first things I've done when I joined the company is kind of establish this level of competitiveness between the business units, right? Like we wanted to show off that we're the best, not because we were one company, we want to collaborate, but it gives you this sense of belonging and being proud of what you do. So that's one thing, is that the vision and being proud. The other thing is that the second thing is probably the coaching element, is being able to just grow the team members. I do that a lot, or at least I want to think of myself as someone that invests a lot managing downwards and working with my team, giving them advices that are just beyond like the day-to-day work, right? Like what they want to do with their careers, and trying to strategize together like their career path. Something that I try to do a lot. The third thing is, so we talked about vision, we talked about the coaching. And the third thing is, I think that for these type of roles, because you don't have a target and an easy way to achieve it, there's a lot of recognition in place, right? Giving them ownership, a sense of ownership on a specific project, giving them recognition when they're finishing and being successful with that, because that's their baby, right? Like that's their sense of achievement, is like owning something, delivering it from A to Z and getting the recognition. So there's a big element of delegating ownership and giving recognition.
I don't know if you realized, but you're describing a life cycle, a motivation pyramid, if you will. So the vision being the greater goal, what are we working towards? I think it has become a bigger part of the decision making when people are looking into companies. So what is this company set to achieve? So being able to iterate the vision, it's not the one time where you read it, it's not the sentence on the wall. It's repeating it on a weekly basis in one-to-ones, because it's so easy to forget when you're lost in the weeds of things. Coaching is hard to do, right? In my experience, coaching requires patience and it requires deliverance, especially when you know what needs to be done.
Yeah.
You sit with you sit with an employee and you know what needs to be done. There's no doubt about it. You've been there before, but you can't just tell them what to do anymore. It's not that type of a workplace. They need to get to that conclusion themselves, right? How do you do that as a manager when you have all these pressing priorities, and when you already know the answer, how do you resist giving it straight away, and how do you lead people into that answer?
I almost want to bounce back the question to you and see how you deal with that. If you have any advices.
I have an advice. I have one advice that I took from Bob Dylan.
Okay.
Surprisingly, his thing was put a question mark instead of an exclamation point in each one of your sentences. First and foremost, just start with question marks and see what happens. The second thing is, and that's autonomy and ownership. I know my first manager, I was an intern in an advertising agency. I had zero experience. And my manager was not afraid of putting me in front of the customers on day one. She knew that by putting me in that spot, I'll have to step up. And I think coaching is about you iterate a vision, you carve out a territory for that person to own, and then you help them reach their conclusion on their own with questions. So if you'd ask me what does a one-to-one look like with you? What are the things that you usually discuss?
So it's a great question, because I also myself, so a lot of my one-to-ones are very, let's say, bullet points driven, right? When I come to the meeting, we each contribute a few topics that we want to talk about ahead of the meeting, and then we just discuss this. And generally speaking, I try myself to allow some time not just discussing those bullet points, because otherwise you never grow, you never coach, you never develop. both on my side and my employees. But I'd say that when we talk about so a big part of that would be just tactical things. We need to solve task A, B, C, and we just I see where I can help them with that. A lot of the part on the coaching is probably more related. I try to get my team to understand different opinions in the company, right? So I invest a lot of time in stakeholder management. I think it's critical for the success of our team. And so I try to almost simulate what would that person that you're going to speak to going to think. And I'll try to have a conversation and saying, and direct them, like, would they get upset? Would they be happy about it? How are you going to approach that?
Right? This is huge. I think this is one of the biggest gifts as a manager you can give your employees, and giving them the perspective from the rooms that you are in and they're not. It increases the sense of belonging and connects them to the bigger picture. That's huge. I'm really happy to hear that you do that.
Yeah, and I think that especially for my role and my team's roles, they definitely need it. I'd say that from a coaching perspective, I like the Bob Dylan example of the question mark, so I'll use it more. Other than just like, does that make sense? Which is like the classic question.
This is just like, yeah, agree with me quickly and let's move on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a good advice. I'd say that I focus a lot on growth of careers, right? So I try to it's not something you could do every weekly one-to-one, but I have with most of my direct reports a monthly meeting that is focused on like more how do we grow your profession, your career.
How do you have that conversation without leading someone out of the company?
First, I'm a big believer in people, and I think that the more I build trust with them and give them that advice, the more they want to learn from you as well. So there is like some sort of like, I guess there are two impacts here. One is like, oh, I want to grow my career in that direction, but the other impact is like, I'm really enjoying that conversation. I want to learn more, which is the feedback that I've received in the past. And I'd say that it's more the way to mitigate that is really to focus on the growth of the skills rather than the growth of like a specific title or a specific salary. It's not really about that. It's really, what do you want to do, right? Like a common question that I ask my employees is, 10 years time, tell me which C-level you want to be in. Do you want to be the CPO, the chief product officer? Do you want to be the chief revenue officer? Do you want to be chief strategy officer? What do you want to do?
How do they respond to that? Because when I was asked about my 5 years fuzzy vision, like I couldn't iterate an answer.
Yeah. So I'm not a big fan of also like 5 years vision, but to me, like that C-level is more about like, in which function do you want to grow, right? It's less about like, do you want to be a C-level? It's more about, do you want to be mastering in product? Do you want to be mastering in sales? Do you want to do something? You want to be project management and strategy?
There's a byproduct to that question, and that I think is beautiful to see, is you demonstrate belief in their ability. You're like, it's granted that you will, become super senior. Now it's a question of where do you wanna go, and that's very empowering. It's an empowering way to ask an easy question. I like that.
And they react well to that. I mean, I think that you could see that it makes them think, right? Especially in those type of line of businesses units where it's a bit like you're operating as a generalist, right? You're doing a bit of marketing, a bit of product, a bit of sales, like I'm getting on customer calls, a bit of services. And it's one of those places where you could go either way. So you could see that they start thinking about it, and the more they think about it and reflect, the better you understand them. So
that's very cool. We're about 5 to 7 minutes shy of wrapping up. I want to ask one question that's quite personal, and that's, how are you measured in your role? What makes you successful in your role?
First, I have a bonus plan, and I have very clear measurements that are probably a bit boring, things like revenue, retention rates, and things like that. So obviously there is just a standard KPIs. From how do I measure myself, or on the day-to-day, how I'm being, viewed and measured by my direct manager, it's really how we drive the business as a whole forward. And a big part of that is people. So making sure, because we're quite a small team, making sure that retention of employees is very important for us, because that's the way we grow forward. And the overall identity of the business unit is there is like a brand, almost like a business unit that we're trying to build. And I think that's something that is quite hard to measure, but it's probably something that I'm being measured on from a perception perspective.
So hard metrics, revenue, customer retention, and so on. And then softer metrics, which is employee retention, which is a hard metric, only harder to influence. We'll touch about that. And then the identity of the team you're working on. So is that like your personal brand, the team's personal brand?
I think it's a team's personal brand, right? You want to be, I think that's more like, it's a soft measurement, but you want to be known as like a very professional, best-in-class team within the organization. You want to be known as a business unit outside, also as a business unit or as a line of business that is innovative, that is delivering value to customers and so forth.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how much pressure is on you at work?
I want to say 8. 8 because I'm the kind of guy that will never say 10, because there's always more pressure that can be put on you. I think that I'm benefiting from the fact that I'm in London and most of the company is in Israel. And for context, 300 employees of the 500 are in Israel. The CEO, most of the C-level are in Israel. And so most of the pressure is there. So I'm relatively okay. So I say 8 is a good number.
How long has it been 8?
It probably moves in between 6 to 10 on an average, right? Like there are days that it's just like over the roof, a lot of changes, a lot of pressure. So it's just no single point that it's just 8 for more than one day, probably. That's just, I guess, the bipolar impact of a startup.
And what would you say the stress levels of your employees?
I'm hoping that it's a 6-ish. There's a lot of, and I do just consider this part of my role to create a bubble for them, right? To block a lot of stress. There is a lot of stress coming from management, from external stuff that are happening in the market. I'm trying to give them a relatively warm place to just operate with no stress. But there are sometimes things are happening.
I'm asking because in a startup with all the uncertainties and pressures, one of the manager's roles is that to create that bubble, to create that safe environment. And when we're talking about startup nightmares, it's a lot of times how do you operate when you don't have that? So your average level of stress is 8, pretty high. You try and keeping it to a 6 for your employees. How do you do that?
First, I try to speak to them a lot. So I try not to spend all of my time managing upwards and sidewards. I'm a big believer in like you need to spend about 50% in my level managing downwards, right? You cannot be like just have 1-to-1 and that's it. So I try to speak to them a lot. I try to not change their priorities every day. I think that a big part of the stress level of an individual contributor is having a change of just like having uncertainty. And so I try to, even if I get a change of direction from my direct manager or I see different things, I try to involve that change of direction smoothly in their day-to-day. So it's not, remember the thing that we talked about on Monday, let's do that just so that you know, next Monday there is some sort of another new thing that came in that we need to tackle. But I really want us to finish first that thing we talked about, rather than we need to deliver this by tomorrow, which isn't productive for them and add more stress. So
mitigating changes to them, buying them time.
Yeah.
Also giving them the sense of completion. If your projects are terminated halfway through, hinders your confidence and hinders the motivation. So having been able to complete the project, even if it's not implemented, even if it's not used, I think it's big. You know, you never know when you're going to go back to that specific initiative. So I think that's a great way of reducing stress in that regard.
I like how you reflect my answers, by the way. It's helpful for me to structure my thoughts as well.
Because it's a very nuanced role. You have a lot of people reporting it to you in dotted lines. Some of the pressure on you is because you're measured on things you don't necessarily influence, I'm guessing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. 100%.
And it makes life so hard and so complicated. If you're in charge of revenue, but you don't actually pick up the phone and call your prospective customers, your leverage in influencing is diminishing. It's small. And that happens more and more as you evolve into senior leadership roles.
Yeah, exactly. You need to learn how to manage metrics and influence people without them reporting to you.
And because there's so many variables that you are measured on, how do you manage expectations with your higher ups? The classic sales situation is you want to under promise and over deliver.
Right.
As an individual contributor, this is your job. Manage expectations. Say I'm going to bring X and then get X plus 20%. As a manager, when you put yourself in that position of under promising, it puts you in a direct clash with the other senior stakeholders. What do you mean? Why are you saying we can only get X? Don't you believe in the product? Don't you believe in the vision? That is very tricky territory for any VP in a commercially minded organization to navigate through.
You're spot on. It's a difficult situation to be in. You want to be, I think, as a human nature is to want to deliver, right? And we want to deliver. And so we want to commit to a number that is realistic or a growth path that is realistic. First, there is an element of aligning with your own direct manager. And I think that me and my nature, I'm realistic, right? So I will always go for the realistic scenario, not the stretch scenario. And I work well with direct managers that stretch me, right? That know that they need to stretch me. And so say, I hear what you're saying, but you need to take another 10%, or you need to find a way to grow inorganically somehow. And so I think that actually helps me stretch myself. The way I then cascade it to the team, though, is that in my view, I'm doing this negotiation or this kind of forecasting with my direct manager and then with the other C-levels, and eventually we're signing off a number. Once we sign off a number, I'm going to be the biggest believer in it, right? I'm not going to go back to the team and say, oh, we have a re-stretch, we'll never make it. That's just not I think that's for any manager, you really have to believe in it, right? If you're not believing it, then your team won't believe in it. So to me, I'm trying to separate between those two processes, do that kind of stretching process with your direct manager and the other C-levels. And then once number is locked, is really just focus on delivering it. Be the biggest believer in that number. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult.
So there's a time for negotiations and for rationalizing why a certain number should be. But once it has been decided, regardless if you agree with it or not, you have to start believing in it. And the sooner you change your focus the sooner you embrace that number, the better.
Yeah.
I've been in situations where I had to downplay what I thought was achievable, and I was called out for it. Like, if this is what you're saying, maybe we need someone in that role that believes that the number could be twice as big. And that's a very challenging situation to be in for a manager.
It is. I agree. How did you solve it, by the way?
I didn't. In all honesty, I didn't. I stayed true to what I thought is possible, but it diminished the trust my leadership had in me. At the end of that scenario, we were only 30% of the target anyway. Okay, so that was a classic startup mistake of just, shooting for the moon, hoping to hit the stars, but not actually leaving the atmosphere.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. I remember myself thinking in many cases in the situation, you start questioning yourself. Am I just wrong? Am I just, literally just being too conservative? And that's actually possible. So it's always, it's tricky. It's tricky to get the number right. And I think that I like being stretched. And I like an external opinion. And actually in a forum where I need to present to the management with 6 other people saying this is just too low, that pushes me to go back and think of new ways to bring revenue, new ways to grow. So I in the meeting, I probably wouldn't be as happy, but when I'm thinking of it in my kind of own space afterwards, that actually drives me forward.
So sometimes you're bound to get it wrong, give an overestimate, or wildly underestimate something. How do you recover and optimize and save face with other stakeholders when these things happen?
I'll divide it into my answer into two. First, when you're underestimating performance and then you end up doing well, that's easier, I guess, to position it in the right way. When you're underachieving, which is, I guess, the tougher situation to be in, one way is to rationalize, just like do a post-mortem and understand why you didn't achieve the targets, whether it's a number or a personal goal or a project goal, is understanding exactly what happened. I think that the analysis is one thing. What really helps other stakeholders and management feeling a bit more confident about it is that you're open to change your behavior, right? So you're saying, I've done this and this and this wrong, or my team hasn't performed in these elements. That's great. It's about showing what actions we're taking to improve things. So it gives you the reassurance that things are not going to be as bad next time.
How do you take on criticism without being hurt by it, without losing confidence? It's not the easiest thing.
No, especially I'll admit that for me, it's not easy at all. As in, my initial reaction when I get criticism is to push back. I would say, no, you're wrong. So that my initial reaction is actually to take it quite hard. For me, being aware of that, it's already an advantage. And so for me, what normally I would do in those situations is that I'll ask for time to process that. And when I think and digest afterwards by myself on a specific criticism, I'm normally able to see first the right things or the things that are correct and I actually should improve, and also I'm able to separate that from things that maybe I'm not necessarily agreeing on or that I have a different opinion, and then I would actually engage in that conversation again with my direct manager or whoever it is that voiced that criticism. But me personally, I need that processing time.
So, as a manager, you've set the goals for your team, you've negotiated them, and for whatever reason, you didn't meet them. How do you build your team's confidence back up, let alone yourself? What are the processes that you're putting in place in order to get better?
First, I need to do it better. It's one of my, I wouldn't say weaknesses, sounds always like negative, but it's one of the things that I need to get better at, encouraging my team and driving them forward. Because my tendency is to be critical about myself, critical about my team. And so I tend to pass it on when we're not delivering. To say, look, guys, we've done a bad job in that project, or we haven't done it as well. This is what happened. This is what we need to improve. And so I tend to be very rational about it. And I think that I need to be a bit more empathetic and more motivational. So it's a learning point for me that I need to work on. I'd say on the flip of that, I'd say that being rational about it means that it's normally being delivered in a constructive way, that we know what we need to solve. So that, like, knowing that there are some specific actions that we need to do in order to solve something also removes the uncertainty and that feeling of like I don't control my own destiny.
Now, I want to argue that another problem in startups, especially when you're working with super experienced and smart people, is that you start solving problems that don't yet exist.
Yeah, I can totally identify with that. Yeah.
How weird is that? You have so much going on right now, but you're solving for something that might happen in a year from now, and then they're like, actually, that's not a problem yet, and you have to like just put it in a folder, and then organically it comes back, and now this project is a success, and you've done work on that you haven't worked on that for the past 6 months.
Yeah, and I faced so many instances like that in Similarweb, not because of the company, but we have a lot of smart people, ex-consultancies like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, and they come in and they would say, look, we really need to think of what will happen in 6 months' time when we get to that product line that we're launching a new product line, as an example. Yeah, and my initial reaction is always like, we'll solve it when we get there, but this is really just like, so it does tend to make things over complex and probably just creating new problems that just don't exist.
Guy, before we wrap up, anything you'd like to promote, and when can we learn more about you and the work that Similarweb is doing?
We have a LinkedIn page for Similarweb, and we're posting there every month a list of upcoming e-commerce websites. It's quite interesting, so check that out.
With that, Guy, I want to thank you so much for coming to the show and speaking openly about your day-to-day life and experiences. I hope our listeners get a lot of value out of it. I'm sure I did.
Thank you for having me in the show. It's been a pleasure.